Hey guys, welcome back to 99 Everything with Jonathan Lau, me, your host. And this is the podcast where we aim to try to maximize and 99 everything in every facet of our lives. So today's guest is a certified dietitian. He's also a high school friend of mine. He's also a very skilled soccer player, very skilled pianist, and very skilled trumpet player. So a perfect guest for this particular podcast. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Eddie Lunn to the podcast.
Thank you, Jono. Thanks for having me.
No worries,
You're too
man.
kind.
No, it's the truth. Also Eddie was like, did you top PE or pass?
PE.
Yeah. So he topped our state for PE in the it was
I came fourth in the state.
So literally
not that great.
Literally not up there in the 99th percentile. But yeah, man. So just let's get straight into it. So you want to just tell us about your upbringing and what kind of led you to becoming a dietitian?
Yeah, so I guess, when we were all in high school together, we were also trying to figure out, what do we want to do with our lives? And, the most common answer everyone said was, I want to do law, I want to do medicine. And I guess for me, it was, I sort of got drawn into the health industry. The idea of being able to help people is, everyone finds that quite rewarding. But I think sort of what clicked for me was actually when I was in my first year of uni. So I started off doing a combined degree. It was an exercise sports science bachelor's with a master's of nutrition and dietetics. And in my first year, my mum got diagnosed with leukemia. And then, so, she's gone into Westmead, she's getting the chemo, she's really sick. And I remember growing up for mum and for our family and in our culture, food is such a important thing. That's how you bond as a family. And I remember going in to visit my mum in the oncology ward, and she'd be so sick after having her chemo. She'd be vomiting, she'd be nauseous. She lost so much muscle mass during that time. She was really malnourished. And it sort of got me thinking about how, when we're well, food is something you just take for granted. You kind of just get up, eat, move on, go on with your life. And it's only when we're really unwell that we sort of appreciate how important food is and how much it plays in not just our health, but our mental health and being able to socialize. You think about being able to sit down and eat lunch with your family and your loved ones. And when you're in hospital, you're in a dark room alone, you're being served food that's not necessarily your cultural foods. You're being served food that's cooked in a different way. It's at a different time that you're normally used to. And it sort of really fascinated me how food does a lot for us. Health, mental health, and even just social and cultural engagement. And so, watching mum deteriorate and it sort of got to a point where she physically couldn't eat because everything would come back up. And so the dietitian at Westmead, and mind you, I was 18 at the time, I had no clue what a dietitian did, right? When the dietitian came, I just thought, are we just doing meal plans and weight loss and stuff like that? And what the dietitian did was they put a feeding tube in her nose. And so what the dietitian's role was doing a lot of calculations and trying to nourish my mum as best as they could. And so I thought that was really cool, that dietitians are more than just, the food police or the food Nazis that everyone likes to think of them as, and they actually do a lot to help people improve their quality of life. So that's what really drew me into dietetics.
Awesome, man. So what do you think if you didn't have that thing happen, like in your family, like, I guess that was a big turning point to shifting like where you wanted to go. That's really cool. So, can you think what would you have done if it wasn't for?
I think the field of dietetics would have been really different. So up until that point, I had really been interested in sports dietetics.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky and really privileged to get the opportunity to work with South Sydney Rabbitohs, one of the NRL teams.
Cool. That's really cool.
So I was an intern. I wasn't responsible for much.
Yeah.
And like whilst it was an amazing experience and I really enjoyed being able to see some of the fittest people on the planet, I didn't find it as rewarding. You do all that work just to trim 2% of body fat off an elite player, whereas when you're in the hospital, you can help a elderly, malnourished, frail person get the strength to go see their grandkids and get out of hospital. I thought that was a lot more rewarding. That's
really cool, because that's like why I did private practice. Like I didn't want to be a sports physio either. Because it's way more rewarding getting someone to like climb out of bed than like beating like the time by 1 second. For me personally, and I guess for you too.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. So you switched from more like sports focus to more like, I guess, health and function focus. So that degree was it 5 years?
Yeah, it was a 5 year. So
5 years
sports
degree.
science 3 years, and then a nutrition dietetics 2 year masters.
Cool. And what was like your first job like coming out of it?
I was really lucky. I got a new grad role at Concord Hospital, just down the road from here.
Okay.
So dietetics is quite a small industry to begin with. So there were a lot of graduates. There weren't a lot of new grad roles available. So I was, just quite lucky. Right place, right time. And the new grad program at Concord was really supportive. I started off in the neurology ward, so I'd see a lot of patients with strokes and they couldn't swallow. So we'd had to do a lot of tube feeding until they recovered from their stroke. And I really liked it in that hospital setting. As you said, it's that reward, sort of seeing patients get well enough to leave hospital. So I've worked in hospitals since. So after I've been working at Gosford Hospital most recently in their ICU, and that's a very different challenge.
Okay.
We've had COVID through that, and the demographic on the Central Coast is quite different as well to metropolitan Sydney. So there's been a lot of new, I guess, nutrition issues that we have to deal with. A lot of things like food insecurity, alcohol abuse, drug abuse.
So that's more popular in like the Central Coast.
It's more prominent, we see, and so it's often our interventions aren't just as straightforward as just eat healthy when you go home, because some people just don't have the money, or for them putting a roof over their head is a struggle enough. So we have to try and work with that to try and make healthy, sustainable living something that they can achieve within their personal circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's a bit of like social work associated with that too. Cool. Yeah. And is dietetics the same as being a dietitian? Are you a dietitian by trade?
Dietitian.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an interesting one. There's a lot of nutritionists these days. Can you tell us and me the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian?
Yeah, so to be a dietitian, you have to have a university degree. So the bare minimum is a 4-year undergrad degree, or there's 2-year master degrees available. With nutritionists, that label isn't as strongly regulated. So there definitely are lots of really good nutritionists out there, don't get me wrong. But the regulation towards that title isn't as strict. So you could do an online course. And call yourself a nutritionist. So I mean, it's not I'm not having a go at nutritionists. There's some out there.
Have a go at them.
There's heaps of people out there who are really good. And a lot of what the nutritionists do will be a lot of healthy eating and education for healthy eating, was I guess the dietitians will have that extra training with clinical conditions, so chronic health, acute health, and being able to diagnose and do extra.
Gotcha. Okay, that's kind of like, I guess, an exercise physiologist versus personal trainer.
We
can also work with like unhealthy populations.
Yeah, you can do a lot more.
Yeah. What would you say your biggest pet peeve about nutritionists are? You can let it out.
I wouldn't stop talking. I think even within the health field, we have a tendency to almost misinterpret scientific research.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure you see that a lot as well, John. You see a lot of with social media. The people will try and create like a 15-second summary of years and years and years of research, and it's really easy to then misinterpret that. For the average person listening at home, if I talked about p-values, sample sizes, power, is this study randomized, is it controlled, double-blinded, single-blinded? Like, most people wouldn't know what that means, but when you see the headline, if you drink 3 coffees a day, you're blah, 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 and then people then look at that headline and then they judge they make their nutrition choices or their food choices based on something that's not necessarily applicable to them. And I got to say, even within health, as clinicians, we're not very good as a profession, as an industry, being able to separate a well-designed study and a poorly designed study to then guide our clients and our patients.
That's a really good point. So I think it's because, like, today's day and age, it's like instant. Like, people aren't going to like really
dig deep.
It just takes too much time because people just want. It takes a lot more brain power to review and critically appraise a study, right?
Oh, absolutely. And to challenge your own beliefs. Like, it's one thing to Google something, because the algorithm will just reinforce your bias.
Confirmation
right?
bias.
Yeah, exactly. But so trying to being open to have your beliefs challenged, like it's challenging.
Yes.
Like even I struggle. You know, when someone says, "Oh, you're doing something wrong," immediately your nature is to become defensive and try
100%.
and justify yourself.
Yeah.
But it's a tough skill
Yeah.
to learn, and it takes years, decades to sort of be comfortable with that.
For sure. I liked how I've like gotten better at it is like I'm just looking for the truth. Doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong, just whatever the truth is. But yeah, like so I would agree too. Like I think people just read the abstract or they read the headline, and they forget that sometimes like the subject participants could be like fucking mice.
Yeah,
You know, it's like
exactly,
it's not relevant to human beings sometimes.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
So okay, that's interesting. So I guess like that's why I guess having the university degree is good because like I'm pretty sure you and I both had a full course where it was just literally how do you read papers.
Yeah.
You know, it was so boring.
I remember,
But in hindsight, you like appreciate it.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, and I find myself sort of going back to those notes I wrote, in that course, and you're looking at a research article and you're pulling up your notes and being like, okay, I wrote here in my notes the p-value is this. What does that mean? And then trying to translate that to something that I can apply.
Okay, that's really cool. What would you say a typical day of work is like for you right now? So, and I guess tell everyone because you said you work in ICU, like, I guess like what field of diet, because I'm sure dietetics is a big,
really big
range.
Yeah.
Like, where do you work in and what does a typical day look like for you?
So when most people say dietitian, I think the average person thinks meal plans, weight loss, healthy eating. In the ICU, my role is a lot of artificial feeding. So you can imagine in ICU, everyone's critically ill. Almost all of them are on ventilated machines. They're having machines doing their breathing for them. So you can imagine they can't eat if they're unconscious. And so to nourish them, the nurses will often put feeding tubes in, and my job is to then calculate how much we need to feed them. Sometimes we get patients they'll have a big gut surgery, or for whatever reason we can't access their gut, and so the surgeons will tunnel a line into their aorta, and my job is to then feed them through that line into the heart, so it bypasses the gut. So that's something called parenteral nutrition.
Wow, so you feed the heart.
So the nutrients go straight into the bloodstream. So we might have patients, for example, they might have had a diagnosis of colon cancer, and the surgeons have resected that and they've cut the bowel, they've opened the person up, cut the bowel out, and maybe their gut's taking a little bit longer to start working again. And we can't exactly just fast them for 3 weeks while we wait for that. So we need to nourish them and get some nutrition into them. My job, I like to say it's a lot of maths, because I'm trying to estimate, okay, how many calories does this person need? Can we feed them this much? Do we need to look at respiratory function, cardiac function? Are we able to feed them that much? So
absorption rates.
So it's not as simple as this person's burning 2,000 calories, we feed them 2,000 calories. If you're in critical organ failure, your gut can't necessarily handle that nutrition, and sometimes we have to underfeed, knowing that's suboptimal, but at least it's getting some nutrition in until they recover well enough.
Right. Well, I'm going to just fast track this question because I was going to leave it later because it's really relevant. So a lot of, I guess in the fitness space, they're like calories in equals calories out, right? And look, just from my perspective, I think for the most part that's true. But what we said before, it doesn't take into account how well you absorb calories, right? Or like nutrients.
Absolutely.
So like even in the fitness space right now, like there's always like confusion regarding like, oh, you can only take like 30 grams of like a protein bolus, otherwise everything else you're not going to absorb, So I guess because you see the worst of the worst, but what do you find it makes someone not able to absorb their nutrients as well?
Yeah, so for my critically unwell patients, when they've come in, let's say they've come in with a high-speed motor vehicle accident. So a lot of the blood flow will be diverted to the injury site.
Yes.
And so when you feed, under normal circumstances, when you eat, your body will divert blood flow to your gut to then digest, absorb, metabolize. Those patients, the gut is the least of the body's concerns when they've had a car crash. And so if we pump them with calories, it actually ends up doing more damage because it just sits in their tummy. The stomach's not getting any blood flow to break that down and send that to the small intestine. So it ends up just sitting there and it starts piling up. And then we have patients aspirating, which means it eventually gets back up out of the esophagus into the lungs, and then they get pneumonia and choking episodes and that sort of thing. So that's obviously a really sort of extreme case. For the average person, we could talk for days about the different factors that might influence absorption and how quickly the body reacts to nutrition. And really, it's a very individualized thing.
Okay.
We often say to people, like, for example, when you eat a normal meal, that on average, it usually takes about 2 to 3 hours for it to move through your stomach into your small intestine. But we have some people where it can take 5, 6 hours, 12 hours. We have some people where after half an hour later, they're happy to start running around again. It's a very individualized thing. So I think that for the listeners at home, one thing to be really mindful of is, when you're on Instagram, on Facebook, and people are giving out those, the nutrition advice is general.
Yeah.
And it's really you playing around and experimenting and finding what works best for you.
And I guess that's why you'd work with a dietitian, right? To figure that out.
Yeah. And in the bodybuilding space, we have a lot of sports dietitians who specialize in that. Like you would have noticed it yourself in that cutting phase when you're going into preparation for competition, and a lot of those sports where it's very body image focused, like gymnastics, for example, there are dangers when it comes to restricting to that extent.
Yeah.
So I'd really be encouraging people, when you're competing at that level, to consult with a sports dietitian. Just make sure you're doing it safely.
Yeah.
So there's no longer term issues.
Yeah, I think especially it hits women a lot harder because of like the hormonal health, and also like was it menstruation and all that. So just I guess the effects of diet can actually be negative to a degree.
100%. And we live in such a diet culture.
Yeah,
everything's
100%.
about losing weight and looking good, and I think it detracts from enjoying food. Food is so much more than just the calories in and out. You want to enjoy your food and look forward to it. And so you made a good point about women. Like my partner's a dietitian, and one of her mentors was a dietitian for the Australian Ballerina Company, because they realized that these ballet dancers are dieting to the point of you get a lot of eating disorders, anorexia. So they brought her on board just to make sure that yes, they need to be able to perform and dance at the highest level, but we don't want to be sending these young women into hospital being really sick and really unwell and having a poor relationship with food for the rest of their lives.
We're just going to go on tangents because this is so interesting. Because I actually recently had a little like discussion with someone on Instagram regarding like macros. So it seems to be what's really common right now is a lot of like fitness coaches fitness coaches, they'll prescribe macros to people and say this is like the best way. And just for me personally, like I never looked at tracking macros for health.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think there's any need to go to that extent.
Yeah.
The only circumstances where I've seen it is your absolute elite level, the NRL teams where they've got a sports dietitian who does all of that for you. For the average person, or even if you're just competing at just out of, or doing sports just recreationally, there's really no need to be going to that full extent of tracking macros.
Yeah.
We find that, if you've ever done it before, right, you sometimes you're hungry, you just want to eat, and then you're like, oh, I got to get the phone, I got to track everything, I got to weigh everything, and it takes the enjoyment out of eating for a lot of people. The other thing when we're only exclusively looking at macros, then you forget about
Micros.
the micros, the vitamins, the minerals, the other stuff that's just as important for your health. And so I think it can be a bit of a narrow-minded approach when we're just looking at macros. And even with the macros, it's not like there's a golden number, that works for everyone. So for the if you ever just Google the Australian guidelines for macronutrient distribution, there's quite a big range. So carbohydrates, for example, don't quote me on this, but I think the government guidelines are 40 to 65% of your energy intake, give or take. That's a big range, and some people can function really well on lower amounts. Some people need higher amounts, so it's something, especially when you see people selling meal plans and it's just cookie cutter, copy paste. It doesn't work for every single person. Everyone's different. And even day to day, your macronutrient distribution will be different depending on what you're doing, how active you are, if you're doing, big amounts of aerobic activity versus if you're just sedentary in the office, so I'm very mindful of, not focusing on that number just for the sake of that number.
I think because maybe for your population, it's people who are patients are like people who are more than we'll call them negative side, right? Because they come in and see someone.
They're very sick. Yeah.
So I guess as a clinician, you have to be cognizant of like the mental aspect of these tools. For me, like I look at macros purely for performance and body composition, right? So even my coach, like he tells me I got to eat fruit every day. I got to make sure I get this amount of servings. Like just having macros isn't an excuse to just like eat like total shit and just eat McDonald's and lose weight, right? But I think macros also gives you that flexibility. So how I structure my diet, I guess you can just like critique it. It'll be interesting. So I do like an 80-20 diet, which is 80% of my calories are like whole foods, vegetables, like typical things that you can come from the ground and all that kind of stuff. And then I'll give myself 20% leeway of just eating like whatever. Yeah. So like cookies, ice cream, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, you know, if you're spending your life being so strict about everything you're eating, it takes the fun out of food.
For sure.
You know, and a lot of research shows that the more you restrict yourself, the more you end up
binging afterwards. Right?
Exactly, binging afterwards. And so you need to have that balance. And I agree with that. You know, obviously most of the time we want to be eating healthy, whole foods, but have the cake, have the ice cream from time to time. You know, go out, with friends, go to the restaurant. In the hospital setting, we have a lot of malnutrition in the hospital. You know, you think you're frail, old, you know, they're skeletal. You know, and I often say to those those patients, I don't care what you eat. I just want you to eat something.
Yeah.
You know, get something into you. I don't care if you want to have ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Go have it. So it's an interesting with you know. Again, as I said earlier, with food, it's so much more than just calories and just macros.
That's so meta because the whole podcast is about like the holistic approach to everything, right? Yeah, and just like food is not just like the physical aspects, the mental, the social, all that kind of stuff. Cool, man. But yeah, like just to kind of just finish off on that macro point, it's like I think the other thing is if it's for the average person, like you want balance, right? You want to eat like, you don't want to become so like food focused or like, if I don't get like this last gram, it's not good. Yeah. Because this podcast is more aimed for like higher performance and I guess people who really want to maximize like health and like performance, body composition. I guess what are some like dietary tips or like things that you would suggest to, I guess, a bodybuilder or elite athlete? So I know it's not you. I'm sure you still know, but like, what's some things you have seen in your experience?
Yeah. So I'll preface this by saying I'm not a sports dietitian. So definitely consult a sports dietitian if you do get the chance and want to really go to that next level. One of the experiences I found when I was working with the Rabbitohs, the NRL players, was that they need to eat a lot of food, right, just to get themselves through. Like I remember in preseason they were doing triple sessions, so they'd rock up to the gym at 8 a.m. They'd do weights. They'd go to the field at like 10, do another session out running, and then go back into the gym and do like a wrestle session. Right? And you can imagine the amount of calories you're burning, the carbohydrates you're churning through, the protein you're churning through. You need to eat. So the first thing we often say to athletes, don't restrict yourself. Right now, bodybuilding is probably at a little bit more leeway for restriction because you have to, get into a certain
in
shape.
Season, but off season, I think that would be the case.
But for most of your, if you're a weekend warrior and you're playing sports, right, you don't want to go into your competition or go into your match hungry. You don't want to be undernourished or underfueled because you're not going to perform at that highest level. So don't restrict yourself. Don't be skipping meals for the sake of skipping meals. When it comes to strength, obviously we want to be getting enough protein in. The animal-based proteins we know are better absorbed, and that we can go into veganism. That's going to be it's a very loaded topic. Which isn't like we have a lot of like vegan athletes, and it just means they need to get a lot more protein from their plant-based.
It's higher volume for like say a piece of meat, right?
Yeah. So it's not impossible. They just need to eat a lot. So getting enough protein in. The carbohydrates tends to create a lot of controversy because people are either on the low carb camp or the high carb camp. the body prefers carbs as its fuel source.
Preferred
So
fuel source.
it's a very efficient at breaking down glycogen.
Yes.
As opposed to breaking down fat.
Yeah.
And so in terms of power production, you can generate a lot more power through glycogen breakdown rather than fat. Fat gives you a lot of calories, but it takes a lot of steps biochemically to break the fat molecule down into ATP, which
Is that gluconeogenesis?
yeah. So it's lipogenesis. Gluconeogenesis would be the
protein?
glucose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Ideally, you don't want to be breaking down proteins.
Yeah.
You want to be using that for your muscles. But with going back to the macros, you know, if you're in an event where you're running or you're moving using your aerobic system a lot, you want to be making sure that your muscles have the glycogen in them. So people often talk about carbohydrate loading in the days before an event.
I had to do that. So less for performance, but more for like a look.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. To feel that muscles.
Yeah, because you get the water weight being stored with the glycogen. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So pretty much eat enough. Make sure you have enough protein, and carbs should be your preferred fuel source.
Especially if you're running, if you're going to do like a half marathon, get the carbs in.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome, man. What do you personally follow? Oh, actually, before we go on that, what is a typical day of work for you?
Typical day of work. Yeah. So I'm in the ICU. We're doing a lot of feeds,
that's right.
artificial
You're
feeds.
calculating feeds.
I also work in the surgical unit. So once my ICU patients are well enough, if they had a surgery, they'll go to the surgical unit. And so for them, it's often prepping them for home and making sure any surgical wounds don't break down. So for them, I actually talk a lot about high protein diets as well. Not for performance, but just to help with that wound recovery. So if they've had their gut, if they've had their belly ripped open by the surgeon, we need to put that belly back together and get the skin healing. Otherwise it breaks down. And so we talk a lot about protein because your skin's made of protein. So we want to try and get that protein in.
Cool.
And often these patients are feeling sick, nauseous, vomiting. So it's, easier said than done. You don't just go in there and say you need a high protein diet because they don't have an appetite post-op. So we're trying to encourage them and find strategies to get them to eat something to help that recovery.
Yeah, that just made me think like it's not as easy as it sounds because like culturally some people just don't want to eat that, and people also just don't like eating certain foods.
Yeah,
and
like hospital foods aren't
not
the best.
They don't taste that good.
They're not the tastiest to begin with. So you're often fighting a losing battle already, trying to get people to eat. So in the hospital we have a lot of high protein drinks like Sustagen is probably something that everyone's heard of. Those types of drinks just to try and make it a bit easier for patients to get their protein into them.
Cool, awesome, man. So what's your diet like? What's a diet of a dietitian?
It varies day to day, but I would say overall, like I try to follow the principle of moderation, and I'm very much like you, John. I like going out. I like eating cakes and ice creams from time to time, but it's not an everyday thing. So one thing that my partner and I are really trying to do is include a lot more plant-based high fiber foods, which isn't meant to say we're not vegan, we're not vegetarian, right? But there's a lot of evidence showing that incorporating more fiber, more plant-based foods helps a lot from a chronic health point of view, cardiac health, diabetes, gut health, mental health. There's a lot of that gut-brain axis, which we can talk about later. And so a typical day for me, I wake up, I'll have some sort of high fiber cereal. There'll be some milk, so there's my dairy. I'll have some fruit when I get into work. Lunch is usually some leftovers. Afternoon tea, I might just have a cup of tea, and then dinner is usually some sort of protein, carb, veggies, and then maybe it's up like dessert. We'll sometimes have some ice cream or something nice to treat ourselves. So it's not like we're tracking everything and being really strict about everything. We like our food, and it's more all about the moderation.
It sounds like a very healthy, balanced approach. And you said plant-based. So including fiber. So what's the example of that?
So we've been trying to include a lot more like legumes, lentils, chickpeas, because it's a good protein source. To be fair, the initial reason we started doing it was just cost. Like to buy a 400 gram can of chickpeas is 90 cents.
Oh, okay, so it's pretty cheap.
It's much cheaper as a protein source compared to if you want to buy the minced meat. And we ended up, what we found was that like we'd buy the minced meat, and I would eat a lot of it, and we'd have to buy more and more and more. And we found that getting that 400 gram can of lentils or chickpeas just helped us sort of bulk up that meal. So I wasn't buying all the expensive meat. So initially actually started off as a financial decision.
Okay, cool.
But we were like, hold on, there's a lot of fiber. There's some plant-based proteins in here. It fills us up. And so that was something that we've started incorporating. Because truth be told, even though I'm a dietitian, I don't like my veggies. I sort of reluctantly eat them because I know I have to. So for me, it was being able to have those legumes, those lentils was a much more fun way to incorporate more fiber into my diet than just having salads all day.
Yeah. Is that kind of like the black beans you can get from
Yeah. So anything like the beans, black beans, chickpeas, butter beans, kidney beans, lentils, really high fiber, and a pretty decent source of plant protein.
Cool.
And I often encourage people, just to add that into your meat, just to add, you can add some extra protein, you can add some fiber as well. It's great.
Cool. Okay, that's a good point. Like, I'm sure a lot of people would benefit from that because is it a carb or a protein? Like, it's both, right?
Yeah. So things like chickpeas will have some carbohydrates in them.
Yeah.
But they'll also have protein.
Cool.
Some fiber in them.
That's actually would make sense as a pre-workout meal. Interesting.
Yeah. See how you go.
Is that a high GI or low? It's low GI, right?
The plant-based ones are generally lower.
Lower. Okay, so it might take a bit long. Okay. Yeah. Maybe not.
One thing to be mindful of is because of the fiber content, some people do get a bit gassy.
Yeah. That's true. Baked beans. Yeah.
Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with gas. It's a very normal thing. Nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
But some people just don't want to be gassing out the gym.
Yeah. Nah, that's a fair point. All right. So I wanted just to dive into more the physical activity aspect. Yeah. So, we're gonna put this on the video, but you're actually like really good at soccer, and you're actually really good at like the trick aspect. So we're gonna put it up, like all your tricks. Like Eddie can like put the ball behind his back and then kick it back up. So
it's been years since I've done that, but I'll have to practice.
I'm sure I'll
find a video of it. I'm sure it's there somewhere.
Yeah. So what made you? Because you originally were going to go into sports anyway. Yeah. So I guess like what drew you to like physical activity, like PE sports, and and then I guess what do you do for physical activity now?
It's fun. I think the higher you get after competing or, just playing sports, even just going for a run and kicking a ball around with your friends, there's a social component to it. It's fun. It's my way of release, and everyone's got their way of self-care. And I think for me, being able to play soccer and run around was my way of just looking after my mental health.
Yeah.
Certainly not good enough to be a pro or anything, but it was just fun. I like doing it. And so I still do that.
Okay.
So I've been playing since I left school, just with the same team in Epping. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So you still play competitive?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Like just at an amateur level.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's almost, like obviously, you like winning, you like competing, but it's, you do it for fun. You get to see your friends every week.
Yeah.
So I think that component of physical activity is just as important as the, we could talk for days about VO2 and maximizing performance, but the mental health side of things also has a big role.
Cool. So is that's like training and then like game on the weekend?
Yeah.
Do you do any other type of physical activity?
In the off season lately, we've been playing a six-a-side comp, so it's like a social, Wednesday nights, just have a bit of fun, sort of thing. And then like my partner and I just like to go for walks around where we live.
Nice.
Just to wind down after work.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. All right, so soccer's still like your main passion, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But growing up, why were you so into sports? Was there a reason? Like, was it your family, or was it watching stuff? Or
yeah, I think my parents were really keen for me to get involved in extracurricular. I guess that stereotypical Asian.
To a degree, though, right? Because I think Asians, they'll do like the academics and the music aspect, but not so much the sports.
And I on reflection, I wonder if it's to do with the individual achievements. With music, you sit the grades, you do the exams, and it's this person got the certificate. It's not so much a team-based thing unless you're in a band.
Yeah.
But I think for my parents, like both my parents worked as high school teachers when they were in Hong Kong.
Oh, cool.
And I think they sort of saw how if you just pigeonhole a child into you need to do this and you need to be good at it, and it was just academics or just music. I think they saw a lot of young
deficits,
young adults, just struggle mental health wise. They just didn't have that skill set to cope with. Cause, they're being told you're brilliant at this. You've got to be really good. And what happens the day they fail?
Yeah,
because they're gonna fail one day, and they don't have that resilience to build with it to cope with that. So I think my mum in particular was really keen for me to get involved in team sports, because then you learn how to lose as a team. You learn teamwork, and you learn it's more than just your personal success. It's about contributing to a team success.
That's really interesting. My dad was also a high school teacher in Hong Kong, so that's interesting. But it's once again, it's like a lot of people just focus on their career and like they go hard at the career, and it's like that. I guess if people realize how much physical activity can actually contribute and improve that,
Absolutely.
or just literally once again, it's like 90-90 everything. It's like helps your mental, helps your like maybe discipline, helps your like energy levels at work. Like all these things all combine together.
Yeah.
It's just that's why it's so good to. That's good that your mum recognized that.
Yeah.
Because I guess she saw it in her students.
Absolutely, and I think it helps, especially now with these last couple of years with COVID and everyone being burnt out by it. Having something to look forward to after work. I get to see my friends. I get to run around and de-stress. Rather than when you get home from work, you're like, oh crap, I got work tomorrow again. I think that helps a lot with burnout.
And I think what makes it better than, let's say, just watching TV, like, because people will get tired after work and just watch TV. I think, like, once, you are releasing energy, but it's also like I feel like it's a human or like a mammal thing to like, once you like do something hard, you just feel good.
There's that serotonin release after, after
endorphin release after.
Endorphin. Yeah.
After activity.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's not. I mean, some people just like to unwind by watching TV, and that's fine. Each to their own.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's got their own ways of self-care.
Yeah.
And I guess for you and me, it's a lot of activity-based stuff.
Yeah. I'm biased, but I think it's the best one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're speaking to a physio here and a dietitian, of course we're going to say that.
Cool. So just leading on to the next question. So like academically, you were really good. So we went to a selective high school in New South Wales. Like you were definitely up there. But what I noticed is like not just academically, but like most things that you put yourself to, like, studies, music, sport, you excel quite well. Where do you think that comes from, and where do you think your drive and your work ethic comes from?
There was definitely I don't know if you noticed for yourself, John, at school there was a lot of competitiveness.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this, these last couple of months, just reflecting on high school. It was everyone just was so like almost cutthroat. You wanted to be number one in no matter what it was. Like, you want to be first in your subject. You wanted to win the cross country, and I think at the time it sort of helped me achieve, good results. I think looking back, it was in some ways it almost took the enjoyment out of some things.
Sure.
I remember, like, I hated doing the cross country. Like,
interesting.
I hate running for the sake of running. Like, I like running after a ball or doing some sort of skill-based activity, but running just to run, I hated it. And every year I always remember, I never wanted to run it, but there was an expectation that I had to run it, and I had to, place in the top 3 because I did it the year before, and everyone's like, oh, Ed, are you going to win this year? And I'm like, there was almost that pressure.
Oh, that's interesting.
That external pressure. So, I think that value, I guess, that, being brought up with that expectation that, you need to 99 everything and you need to do your best. I think it's important to make sure that to differentiate between you're trying your personal best as opposed to being so obsessed with being the best. Being better than someone. Intrinsic versus extrinsic. Yeah. Exactly. And I must admit, that's something I still struggle with today, because it's everything I've grown up with has always been about extrinsic motivators. Okay. And for me, trying to find that intrinsic motivator is still something I'm working on.
Really interesting. Because it's like, I know that it's not, let's say it's not the healthiest thing, but just, because I thought about this too, it's like, yes, maybe the selective school environment is not great, but also now it has given everyone way more opportunities as opposed to like if we were just like lazy and didn't study, right? So it's like a pro and con.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we were speaking about this off air about how privileged we were going to a school where, it's a reasonably, like, everyone was well off. We didn't really know what struggle street was.
Yeah, for sure.
And having those opportunities, I remember, and my partner won't mind me mentioning this, like, she grew up perhaps not so well off. And we were sort of discussing, how we were raised as kids. And for me, even the simple things like, being able to go on an excursion, not having to worry about, how are we going to get the money to pay for this excursion fee. And, all those experiential, those experiences you have as a child, that school tries to give you, those extra things that you cherish for the rest of your life. I just took that for granted because, I'd just say, hey, Mum, there's a camp going on.
Yeah.
Can you give us $2,500 to go. And they're like, okay, cool. You know, so I think it's only since I've sort of met more people outside of that select school bubble that we realized how like awesomely privileged.
We're so lucky, man.
We're so lucky. Yeah. Just being able to, things like, I need a laptop to do my study. Done. You know, parents would buy, I need a faster Wi-Fi connection so I can stream, you know, learning my lectures. Done. You know, those things that we take for granted. You know,
for sure.
So lucky.
For sure. Like, just like you said, like once you leave the high school setting, you realize like, man, like we're so privileged. Like that's why like I don't believe in complaining, because it's like there's just so many good things that occur in people's lives, and it's like you're almost shitting on other people's experiences by complaining about your privilege. It's like, oh my God.
It's perspective, you know.
Perspective,
and that's
100%.
something that takes years to develop.
Yes. Do you have any like productivity tips? Because I know you're like you were good at studying, right? But also like let's just say like piano, like because we're going to touch onto that. Like what grade did you get up to?
I did my diploma, so it was the associate diploma, the AMIS level. So you go from like 1st to 8th grade, then the certificate, then the AMIS.
So that's level. Like 2 levels above 8th grade.
Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah. Okay. Because that takes a lot of like deep work and just practicing and scales, you know. So I guess, do you have any like tips or what did you do to try and like be focused? Because I'm sure that was also hard. Yeah,
and I must admit, you know, with piano, for example, there were a lot of times where you kind of get home from school and you're like, you know, I just want to chill, you know, and trying to find the motivation to practice. I think in terms of productivity, ideally you want to do something you enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are privileged in the situation where we can actually do that. Some people just have to work to put, you know, food on the table for their families, and you know that's you know, I completely respect that. But if you're in a position where, if you're lucky enough to be able to do something where you enjoy, you tend to be a lot more effective and efficient in what you're doing. One thing I found works for me, and I still do this, is I guess trying to be organized with my work day and my life, you know, and having like almost like a timetable, you know, like the timetables you had at school.
Do you use Google Calendar?
Yeah. Okay. And being realistic about what you can manage.
Oh, that's a big one.
And I think, you know, a lot of people will set, you know, okay, from 12 to 1, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then their entire calendar is blocked out, and you can sustain that for a little bit, but you burn out eventually.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to scheduling things and using a calendar or using a timetable, you also need to schedule in self-care and schedule in rest and schedule in time just to, you know, I'm going to give myself an hour this afternoon. I'm just going to do nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it a lot more sustainable.
Yeah.
So I found that worked for me, especially, you know, going through exam periods, you know, because you kind of just say, you can set unrealistic goals. You know, I'm just going to be like, I'm going to lock myself from 12 p.m. to 12 a.m. and study. And no one does that. So you break it up into chunks that are a lot more realistic. You schedule in some breaks.
Yeah, okay.
You know, you might schedule in, okay, half an hour, I'm just going to go outside and walk and just zone out and just de-stress and then get back to it.
There's actually like a study for that, like a 6-minute walk actually improves cognition.
Yeah.
Cool. But here's another level. Like, for me, it's like the work I do is self-care. It's next level.
Yeah.
Like, so I get energy doing this.
Yeah, okay.
It's not work for me.
And I think like that's such a privileged position that you're in. You know, that you can love your, you know, I think what's the saying, like, love your work and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yes.
You know, and I think you're one of the few people who are in that position.
Yeah.
You know, and that's so cool. That's a great place so amazing.
Be. Yeah.
Like I commend you for that, Jono.
Thanks, man. Yeah. But that's good. So yeah, I think Google Calendar has been a big game changer for me. Just like actually like, because once you take it out of here and you put it onto something, like it frees up your mind too to actually like I guess focus on whatever you need to do instead of like, like what time was that? Did I have to do that at 7 or 7:30? You know, so yeah, Google Calendar. I think that's a good one. Cool. So do you still play piano?
Yeah. So I still just do it recreationally. So when I moved out, we live in a little apartment, so we've got this little digital piano, so I can just plug the headphones in and just zone out.
Yeah.
And I find that's my way of, like, besides soccer being, I guess, an active hobby, this is sort of like my creative hobby. Yeah, and it's another way of self-care for me.
Yeah,
you know?
Cool.
And you've probably seen, like, every now and then I'll put something online.
I was going to say, like, you upload, like, Dude, it's one thing to play piano, but to like create, like we'll call it art, like to put it online, because it's also another thing to record yourself playing.
Yes,
It's another
I've
thing.
noticed. Yeah,
You know?
like you can perfect something in practice, and then once you know that you're being recorded, you
Record
kind
it,
of just
it's-
like, yeah. And like I still sort of struggle sometimes with that, but like I know I'm not doing it to make money out of it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't bother me if only 5 people watch it on
Yeah,
YouTube.
just an
It's
outlet.
just it's just my
And you're
outlet.
sharing it.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
sure.
exactly.
That's how
you
I
know.
see it with
Yeah.
like my drum stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Um, so okay, you can pretty much answer like you still continue to play music because it's more of like a self-care outlet kind of thing. I guess like what I would say, not everyone has a creative outlet. Like yes, people have like physical activity outlets and all that. Like, what do you think is the benefit of having that? Because you're also like when you make your videos, you're actually making stuff. You know, like you're not just playing a sheet. You're like making your own renditions and like so you're literally creating something new. How do you think that benefits you, or like what do you enjoy about that?
I'm sure there's studies out there about, how I'm sure there's something
brain-
out there
the
about,
brain.
that helps with brain function. I find it something that's really stimulating. And for me personally, I'm not someone who likes to zone out. Like some people, my partner likes to just sort of chill, and that's her self-care. Whereas I always need to be doing something. And I think
Me
for
too,
me,
bro.
creating something is like the ultimate way of
100%.
activity. You're engaging your brain in ways that
Yes.
you're not just going through the motions playing. I'm sure with drumming, if you're trying to think of new kicks and new loops and ways to innovate. And I think for me at least that's I find that really enriching. And that
That's a good
challenge
word.
of trying to create something new.
Yeah, yeah. I think so. I've looked into it a little bit. Like being in a creative state actually allows you to be in flow.
Yeah,
So
okay.
flow state is pretty much this. It's I don't know if you remember back in uni. It was like there's this zone called the Goldilocks zone where it's like not too hard, but not too easy.
Yes.
So it forces your brain to not like zone like because if you're brushing your teeth, you don't think about it. But if something's like a super hard math test, you just like your brain's just like, oh, I can't handle this, right? So it's just right.
Yeah.
And then when you're in flow state, you just feel amazing.
Yeah.
It's just this. It's like probably your hands are just like going.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like
you're
the
not even-
perfect amount of stimulation.
Yeah.
Where you just it's challenging enough so that you're actually thinking,
be
but
focused and present.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but not so challenging that it's just overwhelming.
100%. Okay, cool. Yeah. So like, I think everyone would benefit from a creativity practice.
Yeah, if possible, and I think, look, self-care is such a broad thing. I think we need to recognize that it manifests in different forms with different people. So for you and me, that definitely that creative element works for us.
Some people like bubble baths.
Hey,
Some people like bubble baths.
yeah, exactly, and that's just as valid as
sure.
self-care. And I think especially these last couple of years, who am I to doubt? Who am I to question or someone else's self-care methods? As long as it's not hurting anyone else, do what works for you.
For sure. Okay, so there was a significant challenge that occurred in your life, and you kind of already mentioned it in the beginning of the podcast. Do you mind sharing, I guess, that experience, and also, I guess, how you've grown as an individual from that? Because I think so far with everyone I've interviewed, one interesting similarity is everyone's gone through some hardship, and it's forced them to change positively. So you want to just kind of share that experience?
Yeah. So, when I was 18, my mum had leukemia, and she ended up passing away about 6 months after that diagnosis. And it came at a very interesting time. Sort of, that was my first year out of high school in uni. It was adjusting to, learning how to become an adult. And I think that time sort of coincided with a lot of mental health problems like depression and anxiety at that time, and it was tough. And I think when my mum passed away, it was you almost sort of felt like you were just going through the motions a little bit. I remember she died at about 3 a.m. at Westmead, so we were all there. And I remember I was at a lecture at uni at 8 a.m. like 5 hours, literally 5 hours after she died, and I was just like I just didn't question. I was just like, oh, I got to do something. I was just running on autopilot.
Yeah.
And I feel like looking back, I was almost on autopilot, just for a whole year, just sort of not really knowing what I
How
was
to
doing.
process.
Yeah. I was kind of just doing things because I knew I needed to do them.
That's really interesting
You know,
because a lot of people would. That's so interesting because why?
it
Because a lot of people would
yeah
just be like, "Oh, this sucks," and just stay in bed and just. And
yeah
then they might even go into self-sabotage mode. They'll start like maybe like eating really badly or like going into like drugs or like cutting themselves. But you like stayed the course in a way, and I was around you during that period,
yeah, that's right.
and I actually thought you dealt with it so well, like from the outside at least.
Yeah, from the I think Mum had been really keen for us to try and go about our lives. I remember my brother was overseas because like my brother's crazy smart. He was presenting at conferences and before Mum sort of decided to go, she insisted that my brother stay overseas and keep doing his work. And obviously my brother flew back, but I think there was that part of me that really wanted to keep fulfilling my mum's wish, just to keep living and keep going about my business. But I won't deny there definitely was a lot of grieving and almost self-sabotaging, as you mentioned, Jono. Perhaps people didn't necessarily see that from the outside. And I think what helped me through it was a lot of that social support. And I think
that's a big one.
yeah, absolutely. Obviously, uni, you guys, the soccer, the guys I play soccer with, I was working at a piano studio, so that all my colleagues got behind me, and there'd always be someone every now and then who, would just text me and say, hey, you wanna hang out? Or you wanna go study to? You'd always come to my place and would just have your textbooks and we'd just study. And just being able to do something with someone and build connections with people, I think that helped a lot. And I think sort of moving forward, I think it shows how important that connect, being able to form the social community, exactly, having that community around you. Because I look back and like mum was the community. Everything sort of went through mum. Sort of having that center point taken out, it was like I love my dad, I love my brother, but we don't really communicate in the same way that we would.
It's like a feminine role.
Yeah. She almost played that nurturing role to everyone. So it was definitely an adjustment. And I think it sort of forced me to learn how to take care of myself, and for many years I didn't do a very good job of that. Even simple things like just learning how to cook a basic meal, or learning how to fold my clothes properly, all those simple things that you take for granted. So obviously we miss mum every day, but I'd like to think that I've sort of come out the other end, and there are still days where you feel really sad and get quite upset, and I think that's just how it is when you lose someone close to you. It never really goes. But I'd like to think that she's sort of looking over us.
Should be proud of you, man.
Yeah, thanks, Jono.
100%, man.
Thank
like
you.
I think just what I also remember was like during that period we had a group assignment.
Yeah, I remember.
And you like did like 80% of it. I was so bad. I just did not contribute very much because I also was so confused. It was hard. It was like
that the one where we had to present something to? You remember Chinmoy, Professor Chinmoy?
Yeah, I do remember Professor
I remember. Chinmoy. Yeah, and it was. I think there was like 4 of us, and we could never find a time where all 4 of us were available. So we were just sort of.
It was something like that, but I remember there was like a lot of different pages to the assignment, and it was just so confusing for me. But no, you killed it. You like carried like our our
look. Don't downplay yourself, John. You contributed.
Dude, I was a bit lazy, and I was so confused by it. But no, it's just like testament to maybe the way your mum like brought you up, but like despite the circumstances, like you still got shit done, and I think that's such a good trait that you have.
Oh, thanks, John.
Like,
thanks, man.
Like so many people will be like, man, like I walked out the wrong side of the bed and my whole day's ruined, and you made no excuse.
Oh, thanks, man.
That is like, I have so much respect for that.
Because stop it, man. You're too kind.
But I mean that because like, I see so many patients every day who give me the shittest excuses, and then I'll see people like yourself. I'll see like Andrew from 1 Hour, like he literally changed his life after being out of prison. I'll see like 32-year-old people with Parkinson's, and they're still getting up to exercise, and then just like it was like 2 weeks ago, this lady would be like in a wheelchair doing like a morning walk, like morning wheel.
Yeah.
It's like, man, like, why are people still complaining? You know, it's just like,
Yeah.
just
And you see, like those patients who have that can-do attitude, generally have a lot better
they just
clinical
get better
outcomes.
faster.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
people just like in their own way. You know, is what I noticed. But no, that's awesome, man. That you kind of came through that. Where do you think what do you think your career goals are like for the next 5 years? Like, what are you trying to work towards?
Yeah, so we're trying to move a lot more into, well, I'm trying to move a lot more into project-based work. So a lot of, I guess, clinical research and quality improvement programs at the hospital. So whilst I love sort of seeing patients, you're impacting one person at a time or one family at a time.
Oh,
Whereas with projects, you can implement something, a protocol in place that can potentially improve hundreds of thousands of people at a time.
like health promotion and policy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I mean, like it could be health promotion. It could, like, a lot of the research projects we're running at the hospital. So for example, I'm trying to set up a pre-operative, we call it prehab, and physios often get quite involved. So before like a big surgery, there's a lot of research shows that your malnourished patients, when they go into surgery, they really struggle. Like the post-op outcomes are really crap. And so a lot of research in the States is showing that if we can get physio and dietetics building up functional capacity and building up muscle reserve and getting them, back to a healthy, nutrition and getting the strength up, that they actually have better survival rates post-op. So we're trying to implement, just get a program like that started in the hospital, and so that involves a lot of data collection, and we're getting partnerships with honors students from universities to help us do the research. And so hopefully these kind of programs can then, rather than just helping one person at a time, you can help lots of people all in one go.
That's so interesting. It's funny because like I've been thinking about that too. But before I speak on that, it's like, once again, it's like holistic. Like, it's not just focusing on the diet part. It's diet and like physical activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also like you touched on, like, the healthier someone is to begin with, if they get hit by an external circumstances, they have a better chance to survive outside of it.
Exactly.
And that's why like health is just the foundation of everything.
Absolutely.
Man. But yeah, like, look, it's funny because I look at it's. In my approach in physio, it's always about treating the cause, not the symptom, right? And when I think about it, treating one person is actually just treating a symptom.
Yeah, if I mean, from a population health point of view.
Yeah, so you're better off actually. I'm better off teaching them not to get messed up before they come in the clinic, and that's actually treating the cause. So like, let's say someone who comes in, let's say typical dietitian is like, they see someone who has like high blood pressure from poor eating habits, and then they go to like, oh, you got to now eat this and this to treat that. You're so much better off like teaching like a group of, or like Australia how to eat well, and then people just don't have to deal with it, so it sounds like that's kind of where you're heading down, right?
Absolutely. And we're finding that the acute system, hospital system, we're being, it's all over the news about how we're, understaffed. And, and if we can try and prevent a lot of these chronic preventable issues that get bad enough to the point where people have to present to hospital, then it helps everyone.
It has like economic
nurses, the doctors aren't under the pump. Patients are healthier. They don't, no one likes going to hospital. You'd rather not get so sick that you have to go to hospital in the first place. So for a lot of, there's things you can't prevent. There's a lot of cancers out there that sometimes it's just genetics. And I get that, but a lot of the things you can prevent, and it's a lot easier said than done. Like, again, on the Central Coast, we have a lot of issues with alcohol abuse and drug addiction, and it's not just, it's not like you can just say, oh, just stop taking drugs. There's big systemic issues that we need to address.
For sure. I get that. So I just dieted for 20 weeks because I've been doing doing bodybuilding shows. So currently what I'm doing is called a recovery diet. So this is something that my coaches put me on, but also like I've looked into, I guess, like bodybuilding coaches and what they've promoted. So typically there's two like ways. It's, you do a reverse diet, which is slowly adding calories back in so you can find your set maintenance again. And a recovery diet is actually a bit different. It's actually like, let's put on like a bit of weight, like a certain amount of weight, so that you're back to a healthy like body fat percentage, hormones are back in line, and like your metabolism and your is pretty much back to normal. Because what I've noticed is, especially So my competition was last Saturday.
Yeah.
Saturday night, my coach said that you can just eat whatever.
Yeah.
And that was the first time in my life where I ate till I was sick.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
actually was like, no,
Yeah.
I couldn't
Yeah.
sleep because I had to sit up because it was so
Yeah.
painful.
Yeah.
I was
Because you
nauseous.
would have essentially starved yourself to an extent
Yeah.
for what 20 weeks
Yeah.
preceding that.
Yeah.
You're gonna be hungry.
Yeah. I think what happened is, is it leptin? That's the hormone that tells you to stop eating? Or ghrelin?
Ghrelin's your hunger. So
Yeah.
ghrelin says you're hungry. Leptin will set your fullness.
Yeah. I think my leptin was just shut down, and I just did not feel the sensation.
Yeah, your
of
body
fullness.
wouldn't have almost remembered what it was like to produce
Be
leptin.
full. Yeah. Oh, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, but pretty much this recovery diet is like he's given me like a set point of macros. It's a little bit. It's more kind of like at my maintenance, a little bit more than maintenance, just to kind of like get my calories back in. But even now, like I still don't feel super full.
Yeah, okay.
So I think it's that's why I need to recover from that.
And it's a really interesting point. We see this a lot with your profession, not profit, like the bodybuilding
Community.
world, bodybuilding community. In that because you've fasted for so long, your gut and your entire body almost adapts to that level of fasting. An extreme version of that is your anorexia nervosa patients. And we get patients and they die from that because their blood glucose level adapts to such an extent. Their heart rate drops into like, I think we had one whose like resting heart rate was, what's the normal resting heart rate? Like 60, 50?
Probably something like that.
Yeah, I think they had one where it was like 15 or something. Like it was crazy low. And
that's because blood's not pumping.
Yeah, so because they're trying to conserve energy so that if you don't have to pump if the heart doesn't have to pump as frequently, it doesn't need to burn as much calories. So it's almost in like energy saver mode.
Yeah.
And so the body adapts really well to starvation. Like obviously we don't want people becoming anorexic. But then trying to reintroduce food and to nourish that body, it's not just as straightforward as
For sure.
and you've probably noticed it's almost like for you trying to recognize what is hunger, what is fullness, that hunger fullness spectrum, perhaps it's still taking time for your body to, I guess, normalize and get 100%. Back to that normal functioning.
100%.
And it's a very interesting sort of issue. I mean, obviously we deal with our anorexia nervosa patients, but even in that bodybuilding space, because one of your questions you sent me was about binging, what kind of foods you'd want to binge on, and I had a long think about that. And I was thinking, well, really, we don't want to be binging on anything.
For sure.
The very nature of the word binging is you can have too much of a good thing. And it got me thinking about like mindful eating, which is becoming a lot more popular these days. And I guess for the average person, listening at home, think about when you've had a really busy day at work and you haven't had time to eat lunch, right? And then you get home and you haven't eaten all day. You're really starving, so you go into the kitchen and you grab everything. You eat everything you can get your hands on, right? And then you're sitting there, as you said, John, so uncomfortably full because you've just eaten so much. And if you think about your hunger spectrum, right? On one hand, you're so full that you're in pain. On the other end, you're so hungry that you kill someone just to get your hands on some food, right? We want to be sort of in the middle.
For sure.
You want to get to that point where I can feel a bit of growling in my tummy. I want to eat something, and you eat to the point where I'm satisfied now.
Yeah, satisfied and full are different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so ideally, it's a tricky thing sort of being able to recognize your hunger cues, because sometimes you're busy. Sometimes when you're stressed, you forget your hunger. You're hungry. Sometimes when you're really active, sometimes those hunger cues get sort of drowned out. And when you've been fasting for really long, your body almost forgets how to tell you you're hungry and full. So it takes a lot of time to recognize that. And one of the things we often really encourage people to do is when you're eating at your meal times, try and really be present with your food. And I know that seems like a really wanky thing to say, be present with your food, but what I mean by that is, if possible, and I know this isn't always possible for some people, but try and remove the distractions. Right? Get your phone away. Sit down with a friend or a family member and just take your time with your food. We tend to find in those circumstances, you're able to, because you're slowing down, your body can adapt a lot quicker. Because I've always been in a situation where I'm really stressed at work and I'm just sort of staring at my screen and I'm just grabbing food. And before I know it, I've just gone through like 2 packets of Tim Tams. I'm like, oh, hold on, I'm not even hungry. I'm just stressed. So we really encourage people, if possible, slow down, take your time with your food, be present with your food, chew, enjoy analyze the textures and the tastes and the smell and all of that, and that can help a lot with just getting your body
Digestion too.
regulated. Yeah, and digestion as well.
Yeah, so. What's funny is I use that to my advantage because I was very skinny. So in order to override the hunger signal,
You eat fast.
I'd distract myself.
Okay.
I'd watch like people eating and I'd eat.
Yeah, okay.
Because so what's interesting is in the off season I'll do that.
Yeah.
And then in season when I have to when I'm eating so much less food, then I'm applying that mindful eating principle. But yeah, I'd watch there's this guy called Matt Stoney on YouTube, and he just eats
he puts the mic next to the.
It's not a mukbang one. He just eats like ridiculous amounts of food.
Okay.
And I'd watch him, and then I'll be like, oh, I finished this, and it'd be so much easier than if I just didn't watch it.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
and if that gets you through it, that whatever works for you, man.
Okay, so just to come back onto that question I did ask you. So my actual question was so during prep, there'd be periods where I was so hungry and I'd want to cheat on my diet.
Yep.
Yeah. And what I was curious about was, of the things to cheat on in terms of macros, what is less damaging to my body composition? So this is my train of thought so far. So I'm already in a depleted state. So if I eat something like rice cakes or let's say fruits, let's say rice cakes, I'm not going to be gaining too much fat because I'm just restoring glycogen stores.
Yeah. So the rice cakes, I'm assuming are
just carbs. It's just purely carbs. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking if I were just to eat plain chicken breast and just eat a shit ton of chicken breast, is that also going to be less likely for me to gain fat? Because like we said before, it takes a lot more energy to convert protein to glucose or fat, right?
So
what do you think from a biochemistry perspective? Which of these is less going to fuck me up?
I'd say the thing with chicken breast, it's essentially a lot of protein.
Yeah.
And so I think 100 grams of chicken breast gives you about 25 grams of protein, give or take.
Yeah.
So from a absorption point of view, if we're talking just muscle building, I mean, most people generally about 30 to 40 gram boluses is the max that your body can take in one sitting. So if you're having 300 grams of chicken breast, that's more than your body, that's more than the average body can tolerate. For the average healthy person, all that means is that your kidneys are going to filter out that excess protein and pee it out.
Oh, so I just pee it out.
You just
I mean, you're stored as fat.
To be honest, you're kind of wasting a lot of money buying all that chicken breast.
Oh, man, when you're on prep, everything's just about wasting money. I'm buying sugar-free jelly.
Yeah,
There's literally no calories in it. Okay, that's good to know. Everyone who's in prep can actually appreciate that.
I would advise against doing that long term. My disclaimer is that
it's not healthy.
It makes your kidneys have to work a lot harder.
Yeah,
and so if you're listening at home and you have any sort of chronic kidney disease, do not do that.
Yeah, okay.
Because it will fuck your kidneys up and you end up in hospital and you have to see me.
Okay.
So yeah. It's an interesting, obviously, I'm a foreigner to the bodybuilding world. So for me, the whole concept of binging on anything is just.
We'll say it's not binging, but you're going over your calories.
Yeah.
So let's say it's let's say I was prescribed 1,800 calories for fat loss. So if I were to eat let's say 500 calories more of let's say rice cakes or 500 calories more of chicken breast, which would affect my body composition.
From a calorie point of view, it's still, the calories are still the calories. So you're still going to, if you sustain that surplus, there's still going to be some extent of weight gain.
Yeah.
Even with because using the example I said with the protein, your body peeing it out, that's assuming that you're well nourished to begin with. Now, if you're in a very depleted state, your body's going to try and utilize as much of that as you can. So from my point of view, either food.
It'll still okay. So there's no difference in if it's a protein versus a carb.
I think saying it whether it fucks you up is probably a bit of a over reach.
Yeah.
You mentioned the calorie free jellies.
Yeah.
That could.
There's it's like collagen or something. It's made of protein.
Yeah. Okay. I've seen some of the those sippy cup, not the sippy cups, those squirt.
Jelly joys?
Jelly, yeah. And at the Asian shop, they've got one which is like 2 calories.
Yeah.
With using a slightly different example. So I used to do a group for gestational diabetes, so women who were pregnant, and so we had to teach them quite strict carbohydrate I guess portions.
Yeah.
Because in that stage you don't want to mess up the baby, so we had to be quite strict. And we had a lot of ladies who'd be like, this is such a little amount of food. I don't want to starve. I still want to eat something, and so we'd be encouraging what we call at the time we call them free foods. They were so low in carbohydrates that it wouldn't affect your blood sugar levels. And I'm wondering, could that be something like a concept of that? Not so much carbohydrates, but something that's really low or 0 calories. Is if you're feeling like you want to put something into your tummy, you can put some volume in.
Yeah,
0 calorie stuff.
That's pretty much, I think.
Just so you can fill yourself up and feel satisfied without
sure.
over going past that whatever that caloric amount.
Yeah,
as you've said.
It's a lot of water anyway.
Yeah, so you'll find a lot of the. I mean, again, I'm very much against the whole concept of dieting for the sake of dieting.
Yeah.
But you notice a lot of those diet products are a lot of fluids.
Yeah.
You're just putting fluids into your tummy, so you feel full.
Yeah.
Without necessarily consuming the calories. I guess my disclaimer to that is outside of the bodybuilding world.
Don't do it.
Yeah. Try we're already in such a weight focused and diet obsessed culture as it is, and so if we don't need to be dieting for the sake of dieting,
this is purely a bodybuilding thing.
Purely, yeah.
Wait, so just for the final answer, what's the worst?
My final answer is neither.
Damn. Okay.
I want to say no. I'm going to say neither.
Okay, that's actually good because this will promote no one to cheat on the diets. Okay, cool. What do you think are the most? We'll say 3. What are the top 3 most common diet myths that people are still believing in 2022 that it's just stupid now?
Yeah. So I had a really long think about this one. So the first myth I wanted to talk about was the myth that your weight defines your health. And I know we talked a lot about calories in, calories out before, but we're in a society where you notice every new year that all those weight loss companies start advertising. Lose. This person lost 8 kilos in 8 weeks, and they glorify it as if it's a good thing. And you and I would both know that your weight there's so many factors that influence your weight. Your muscle mass, your fat mass, your bone density, fluid status, and the number on the scales alone doesn't really give us a very good indicator of health.
Just one measure.
Exactly. It's just one measure. Of all the metrics we use in the hospital system, weight's probably on its own. Weight is probably one of the crappiest metrics of health. And by extension, I'm actually going to throw BMI into that. I'll come to BMI, but there's so many other metrics you could use, like for functional capacity, your 6-minute walk test, your sit to stand. You could do dietary analysis to measure the quality of your diet. Things like your cholesterol levels, your triglycerides, your blood glucose levels, your HbA1c, which is like a long-term measure of your blood glucose levels. Like all of those metrics put together give us a much more holistic indicator of your overall health rather than just the number on the scales alone.
Yeah.
The reason I mentioned BMI as well is that the equation to measure BMI is your weight in kilos.
It's weight. It's not muscle mass.
Divided
or
exactly.
mass.
And as a result, the things like muscle mass, the fat mass, that doesn't get accounted for in BMI. I looked up the history of the BMI. It was interesting. In the 19th century, it was actually developed by a mathematician. It wasn't developed by a health professional. And the mathematician developed as a way just to categorize people. How when they do a census, this person's Asian or this person's, Caucasian. And it was just a way just to put people into boxes just to collect data. And it sort of worked its way even into the medical, into health. Doctors will say, oh, your BMI is this, you're overweight, you need to lose weight. But, when we look at weight and BMI, if people make their dietary choices just with the sole purpose of manipulating that, you can end up doing a lot of unhealthy things and doing a lot of damage. Just for the sake of that number. Yeah. And it's a trap people fall into.
I have doctors still prescribe me, because I'm a physio and an EP, I have doctors still prescribe me patients who have high BMIs and to reduce their BMI. And I'm like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and especially if those patients, if they're able to function and do their things and have a good quality of life and they can move around, are we just losing weight for the sake of losing weight?
Yeah.
We have a lot of patients in hospital who will be often coming quite large. And some doctors, very well-meaning doctors, will ask me, "Oh, can we get this patient to lose weight so that they can get out of hospital?" But that doesn't guarantee. Like what gets them out of hospital is them being able to stand and walk and move. And the correlation between weight and functional capacity, it's not a very strong correlation. You can be 200 kilos, but if you've got the muscle mass to get up and move, you can get discharged.
Sure.
I often have malnourished patients who are 30 kilos and they're so wasted that they need to spend months in rehab just to build that weight back up. So I think one of the myths for the average person, the idea that your weight equals your health, I think is a very poor metric of health.
Sure. But I do have to say though that just I don't think the fat and healthy is a thing.
Fat, so what?
You know how like so this is more like ethical and like morality now. But like how
right, like the idea that being bigger
you can be obese and you can be healthy, because that's really common.
There's a lot of research going into the cardio, the metabolic health, so things like your blood glucose levels, your triglyceride, your cholesterol levels, and I guess in terms of the correlate, there's not a strong correlation that if you're a certain weight, it guarantees your triglycerides, cholesterol.
Oh, really?
There's no, it's not like if you can get to this weight, you're guaranteed to have a good, blood glucose or a perfect cholesterol level.
Because I thought just being at a certain weight puts more pressure on your heart to send blood. So even like these really big bodybuilders who, like in bodybuilding scene, the really big ones, some of them like die because there's just so much mass that the blood has to pump. So the body almost doesn't recognize, it doesn't care if it's either muscle or fat. Just the pure fact that you are a certain weight is putting you at more risk.
If there's and from a physio end, like we'll have patients coming in with they're 250 kilos, and there's so much pressure on their heart that the heart essentially cannot pump blood to the body. When I talk about larger people, for the average person who's got a bit of belly fat, or a bit of a love handle, if you want to call it like that, having a bit of belly fat or being a little bit plumper doesn't necessarily mean you're unhealthy.
Okay, sure. So it's
the extremes.
It's the extreme.
Yeah,
okay, cool. Yeah. So in that case, weight does mean bad health.
When it gets to that point,
okay.
Generally, and when I'm talking extreme, like people who are like 200 kilos who are bed bound and cannot literally get out off the bed. Yeah. Weight then plays a factor. Generally, if you've got to that point, there's probably a lot of other chronic health conditions at play.
Yeah.
And ironically, often it's the weight was the last thing that came into that. Often they'll have other things like diabetes, or often it's a lot of mental health problems as well. Yeah. That got them to that point. Yeah. To that, which then got that weight to that point, which then had those.
That's weight's a symptom.
Yeah. So I think that the myth, it's not to say that we just disregard, everyone throw their kitchen scales out or throw their bathroom scales out and forget about weight. It's not. It's trying to shift away from using that as the primary metric.
Yeah.
Focusing on physical activity, having a healthy diet, those things, and then things like your weight and things like your cholesterol and your blood glucose levels will come.
Yeah. Cool. I think though, how I look at it is like, let's even back to the macro tracking and like the weight scale, like these are just tools. And if you like, it's like a knife, you can use it to kill people or you can use it to cook food for your family, right? Yeah. It's just about the way you use it. Yeah. Because I think if people get like obsessed over like, like I've had patients who like, they'll be like, I gained weight today. It's like, I feel like that. And it just ruins the whole day.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
So for me, it's more like, I look at it completely like no emotion. Like, okay, I gained this much. Cool. It's just something. It's just a measure
exactly.
for me.
It's just a number. Like it's society that attaches a value of good or bad to it.
That's
but it's just a number.
Yeah. Cool.
So that's my first myth.
Yeah.
My second myth that really bothers me is that the idea that supplements are automatically good for you, and there's some circumstances where they're warranted. Yeah. The supplement industry is a very unregulated. It's a huge industry, but it's very unregulated, which means companies are often free to, say whatever they want, really. For the average person who's consuming a balanced, varied diet, your body's got enough micronutrients, vitamins, minerals that you need, that you don't necessarily need supplements. Again, there are certain situations where they're really helpful. So, for example, a lot of my older patients, they need a lot more calcium and vitamin D, and it's hard for them to get enough of that in their diet, so that they get those calcium and vitamin D supplements. We have women who lose a lot of blood when they have their when they have their periods. Sometimes they could benefit from iron supplements. But the idea that if you're an average, just a normal average Joe, the idea that you need to be spending hundreds of dollars buying all these supplements because it will enhance your health, to be honest, it's a lot of it is just your
Just
body
like
will
a-
filter out and you'll just pee it out.
Right. Yeah.
The
Heard
example I
about
like to use is when the first wave of COVID came, all these supplement companies were selling immunity boosters. You know, you go through the shops and people were buying, you know, and it was just this big thing on that it would just say immune booster, you know, and really all it was just vitamin C and zinc. Now both of those ingredients really healthy. You can find vitamin C in your citrus fruits. Zinc you'll find in things like oysters, seafood, meat, fish. Walnuts will have them. A lot of cereals will have zinc added into them, right? So if you're having a balanced diet, you've got those two ingredients already, enough of that in your system. It's interesting the way that the supplement companies market it is that they're trying to paint the picture that it's like a linear relationship where the more you consume those supplements, the more immune, using that immunity booster as an example, right? And so they try and get this idea that, oh, if I have 10 of these, I'm going to be super immune and nothing's going to get me.
But there's a cap.
It's a plateau effect, right?
Yeah.
And most people already just by having a normal healthy diet with lots of food groups, they're already at that highest end of that plateau, if you're thinking that line.
But would you say most people aren't eating healthily?
In Australia, the likely, or I guess in my population group, the ones where I see having big nutrient deficiencies are generally the ones who are either coming in with alcohol abuse because they've just spent like weeks without eating anything.
Yeah.
And my homeless people.
Okay, because I'm not gonna name the name, but I know someone who eats McSpicy's for dinner. He just had chicken nuggets. I don't think he's eating healthily, but he has no negative side effects.
For now.
I hope you're watching this, because he eats very irregularly too. And then like randomly, like in the middle of the night, he'll have like ramen.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like all processed.
Yeah, and look, with those types of people, rather than telling you to spend $100 buying multivitamins,
just have a balanced diet.
Yeah, have some fruit.
Yeah.
If you have your ramen, put some frozen veggies in
it.
And again, going back to what we discussed earlier about, there's nothing wrong with having, the occasional unhealthy food from time to time. That's okay. That's fine.
That's his diet though.
And that's probably where we want to be trying to introduce a lot more food groups. I think if you can, try and have a lot of variety in your diet helps cover any potential micronutrient deficiencies. So my partner, for example, she works as a dietitian with a lot of children who have like autism, and they have often that autism will present in, the kid will only have foods that are red, or they'll only have it's foods that are a certain texture, and they're often at risk of micronutrient deficiencies because if you're only having Oreos and chips, you're not going to be getting any of the vitamins that fruits and veggies and whole grains would give you.
Yeah.
And so that population group, that's the risk group, for developing deficiencies.
So pretty much you're saying he has autism.
Your words, not mine. I think I know who you're talking about as well. So your words, not mine.
What do you say to people who say that they feel fine eating like that? They're like, I feel fine. Like I eat McDonald's, but I feel good.
Each to their own. Like it's an interesting thing where with these deficiencies that it's not like if you have a one day where you don't meet your 5 serves of veg, you're going to suddenly drop dead.
Yeah.
Those chronic things will happen 30 years down the track. And often I'll get my patients who have diabetes diagnosed at age 50, and they'll be thinking, I shouldn't have done that when I was age 20. The caveat to that is like I don't want everyone going home stressing like, I have to have, I have to weigh out my fruit, I have to have my 5 serves of veg, I have to have my, it's like
don't stress about it, but like make some positive changes.
Yeah. And probably the best thing you can do when you get home is try to add a bit of variety into your diet. If I love ramen, there's nothing bad about ramen. Add some veggies when you're cooking it. Lentils, chickpeas. Add some fiber in. If you're having a sweet, if you're having a cake for a snack, have it, but also have a banana as well.
Yeah.
At least you're covering, making sure you're getting all those vitamins and minerals. As well.
Cool. What's something that you would like to just tell everyone from the perspective of a dietitian? Like, what's something we haven't talked about that you just think everyone should know?
I think.
In the diet
can I say 2 things?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first thing is probably one of the things I tell a lot of patients. People who ask me, what can I do to improve my health? trying to include a lot more plant-based. And now, not vegan, that's a completely different kettle of fish. But we see a lot of, I guess, amateur bodybuilders. They have just chicken. It's protein, right? Chicken and carbs. From our overall health point of view, there's a lot of evidence showing that if we can integrate a bit more fiber into our diet, so fruits, veggies, whole grains, fiber helps with chronic health disease management. So things like cardiac health, diabetic management, we often encourage that. Your gut health, and I sort of alluded earlier to the gut-brain axis, and so I'll elaborate on that on a bit more detail. There's a lot of research showing that the brain communicates with the gut. So traditionally, we've always thought of it as a one-way street. When you're really stressed, you might poop or you might get really gassy, right? We're finding that what's happening in the gut also
can go up here. Yeah, exactly. So what you eat can influence your mood.
Yeah, and now there's a lot of research now going into how our diet can help with mental health. There's research with. At the moment, it's obviously not a hugely researched, but there's a lot of emerging research suggesting that, if we can have more fiber, that helps feed the microbiome, and that then communicates to our brain. And so, for a lot of reasons, we'd be encouraging people to incorporate more plant-based foods, which, of course, I love my meat. I love steak. I love chicken. Still have that. If we can throw in some extra serve of veggies, or throw in some lentils or chickpeas, or when you're having your cereal in the morning, try and choose a high fiber cereal. Also from a sustainability point of view, the plant-based foods are a lot less impact on our planet. And from a cost point of view,
it's a bit cheaper too.
A lot cheaper, yeah.
Red meats,
Exactly, yeah. One of the hacks that my partner and I use with vegetables is if the fresh vegetable is out of season, or if it's really crazy expensive, we'll go to the frozen section and get.
I eat a lot of frozen veggies because someone told me it's like the same.
Nutritionally, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
I think the only micronutrient was vitamin C, where the freezing process slightly reduces it, but just have an orange and you're good. So, I think that the misconception that healthy eating needs to be expensive. Not necessarily. You just need to have a bit of guidance sometimes, knowing where to look. The second thing I wanted to really encourage everyone is relax when it comes to diet. Everyone gets so G'd up about, I have to be on this diet, I have to be strict about this diet. And I sort of said this earlier, food is so much more than just calories or micronutrients. There's the social component, there's cultural, for you and me, Chinese New Year, it's spending time with family, Christmas coming up, food is taste, it's texture, it's smell, it's, being able to spend time with people you like. So I really encourage people to try and reevaluate your relationship with food. If you're outside of the elite bodybuilding component, right? Like if you're sitting down and you're miserable with your food and you're like, I have to eat this salad, I hate this salad, but I have to eat it just to get my macros in. I'd be really encouraging people to think, is it worth it?
Sure.
We talk about holistic health, and it's more than just the body fat percentage and weight. You want to be enjoying your food, enjoy the experiences that food brings. I'm probably biased in the sense that we do see a lot of those eating disorder patients come through, and you see how their relationship with food is, where it's just about trying to minimize as many macros as you possibly can to get as tiny and undernourished as you can. So enjoy food while you can. We see old patients come in with strokes and they can't swallow.
Sure.
And they say, you know what, all I would give is just to be able to have a nice cup of tea. So enjoy your food while you can. There's going to come a day where perhaps that's not going to be possible.
Sure. Well, just to kind of touch on that though, because for me, I think in the context of this podcast, which is maximizing everything, right? I think its first step is to get to that place where you can be enjoying food and have balance. But I think in order to become, let's say if you were to become elite, then you have to make like certain sacrifices in order to achieve that goal, right? So I would say like most professional athletes are not eating like cakes and stuff when they're in season, right? So I definitely, because if you just go straight to like being restrictive, you'll start to I'm sure there's many bodybuilders that have eating disorders, because I can completely see that happening. But I think you just have to have the healthy relationship first.
Absolutely.
And then go into the like intensity.
Yeah.
But what I've also noticed is just like just from restricting myself, I have a greater appreciation of food.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so there's a place in Japan, and there's a term for it. It's like they all eat like less than like 80% of fullness, and it's just
Yeah.
like apparently that has like really good health benefits too.
Yeah, and you mentioned sort of, you know, the more people restrict, the more they start thinking about food, and the extreme version of that with the anorexia nervosa is that they become obsessed with food. One of the screening questions we asked to see if anyone's got, you know, a risk of an eating disorder is, you know, are your thoughts dominated by food?
That was me like the last 8 weeks.
And I think that's where, you know, definitely for you, John, encouraging that self-care and rebuilding that healthy relationship with food is really important. You know, it's human nature. The more you restrict something, the more you think about it, the more you want to do it.
Yeah.
And so unless you're, you know, restricting for bodybuilding or you know, some sort of physique-based competition,
Then you shouldn't be doing it.
Don't restrict. Enjoy your food. Have your regular meals. Eat, you know.
Health and body comp looks is different things.
Yeah.
And performance are different things.
And I'm sure you'd agree with me. Like, you know, there's some bodybuilders out there, even though they're shredded, they're not necessarily healthy.
Honestly, bodybuilding is not healthy. It is like
the things you do to your body
it's not healthy.
to get to that. Yeah.
But it's just something that I think it's the same reason. I look at it the same thing as like it's not healthy to be a race car driver or stunt man.
And it just gives you and that's your release. Yeah. And look, I think, you know, with those types of hobbies, it's important to make sure you've got the
baseline of health first.
Yeah. And I guess for the listeners at home, if you're sort of sitting here thinking, oh crap, you know, I do have a pretty crappy relationship with food, or all I can think about is food, or I'm obsessed with my weight, you know, I think now is probably a good time to start thinking, go to your GP, get a referral to see a dietitian, even see a psychologist, because there's a lot of, you know, a lot of those disordered eating, we work hand in hand with psychologists to just try and, you know, get you enjoying food again. Often with those types of patients, it's, you know, if we think about people having breakfast, lunch, dinner, it means 3 times in the day where you're anxious, you know, and scared. You know, for a lot of those types of people, every food decision is terrifying. And you know, I don't think it's any way to live when every single day you're just anxiety.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, and that's great that you're looking forward to food, and that's how everyone should be. We should all be, you know, oh, it's lunchtime, I'm really keen to enjoy my pasta or enjoy my sandwich or whatever it is I had, you know. And we really want to try and build that type of culture where food is meant to be enjoyed. Food's not something that's meant to scare people or, you know, cause stress. It's fun. It's tasty. It's, you know, eat it.
Yeah, it's literally like nourishing. You shouldn't
Yeah, it's not exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know, so we really encourage people to you know, just have a think about how you view food.
Cool, awesome, man. So before the final question, if I guess you don't work with anyone one-on-one, but like, I guess if anyone wants to like learn more about diet, like maybe someone who wants to be a dietitian or wants to work in your space, like what's the best way to like find you or like be in contact with you?
So best place to start if you just want to find a dietitian is going to the Dietitians Australia website.
Yeah. Is that where they can find you?
I'll have to double check my details on there, but you probably just Google me and you'll find my profile on their website. If you have certain specialty interests like bodybuilding, for example, I'd really encourage going onto the Sports Dietitians Australia website, because they've got that extra level of training which I don't have to advise on sports specific nutrition, and making sure you're safe at doing it. The great thing with the database that the Dietitians Australia website has is you can filter by interest. So if you're thinking, you know, the doctor said I need to work on my heart health, you can find a dietitian who specializes in that. Or if you're you know, got an eating disorder, there's dietitians who have extra training in that. Hopefully people don't need to see me, because if you're sick enough to need to see me, it's probably not a good thing. But yeah, there's as we said earlier, the dietitians work in all sorts of spaces. So whilst I'm in the ICU, and you probably never want to see me, there's heaps of dietitians working in private practice. If you have a chronic condition, go to your GP, because you can get Medicare rebates to get a session, multiple sessions with a dietitian as well.
Is there like any Instagram? I know you've recommended me like Jono Steedman.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else?
I really like Jono Steedman because he's
shout outs.
Yeah, shout outs. I hope he notices us. You got to tag him, because he does really well to break down, I guess, nutrition bullshit. You know, and he'll call people out on social media, and show the evidence. And I think he does a really good job of breaking it down so that the average person can understand it. If you've got more of a science background and you're more confident with interpreting critically analyzing research, there's a Instagram page called the Nutritional Advocate, and he's a dietitian based in England, and he goes into like crazy deep dives into like meta analyses, and he just pulls apart the paper and says what's good about it, what's bad about it. It's really good if you're like really into your science and into research. Like I must admit, sometimes I'll scroll through his stories and I'm like, this is even too much for me.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you're really into science, I think he's a good one to go to look at as well.
Okay. Awesome, man. All right. And the final question is, why do you think it's important to 99 everything?
I think it's a value that like my parents obviously instilled in me, trying hard at everything. And I think the key word to that is trying your best, as opposed to being obsessed with being, better than everyone else. I often feel like if you're going to do something, you may as well put in effort to it. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it at all, and that's probably a lesson I learned a lot with team sports. If you're there just to do a half-assed effort, you're letting everyone else down as well.
That's a big one.
You can use that as a quote. And so I think for that reason, it's important that it's not that crucial that you're perfect and you get everything right, but it's important that you give it a go. We have a lot of dietitian students who come through our hospital, and my job is to, all of our jobs as clinicians is to guide them through and make sure they pass. And one of the piece of advice I give to them is say yes to everything and try everything, even if you're shit at it. Because at least if I can see you try something and I can see you be shit, we can find what you're shit at and then work on being better. Yeah. But if you never try in the first place, no one's going to know.
Yes.
And your skill set is going to be limited.
So tiny.
Yeah. So, probably to all the listeners at home, give it a go would be my recommendation. No matter how crap you are. And look, some people give it a go and find it's not for them. And
at least you know.
At least you know. Yeah. Exactly. At least you found out. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for coming.
Oh, my pleasure,
awesome. Jono. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to like or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to. But we'll come and check it out again next time. Peace.